She was living in the root cellar when he found her. He said the house had empty rooms. The root cellar was beneath the ruins of a house that had burned in August. The house had belonged to a family named Purdy, who had packed their wagon and gone to Oregon after the fire, and what remained was a stone foundation, a chimney standing alone against the sky, like a finger pointing at nothing, and beneath the foundation, the root cellar, a dugout 10 feet square, with a dirt floor and stone walls and a timber ceiling that the fire had charred but not collapsed. It was dry. It was out of the wind. It was, by the standards of a woman who had been sleeping in hay barns and abandoned sheds for 3 weeks, shelter. Her name was Coraline Dunn. She was 26 years old, and she had come to the town of Harrow, Missouri, from St. Louis in September, because a letter had promised her a position as a cook in a hotel that did not exist. The letter had been written by a man named Fogarty, who had collected a $5 placement fee from Coraline and a $5 placement fee from 11 other women, and who had then disappeared from St. Louis with $60, and the particular talent for cruelty that comes disguised as opportunity. The hotel did not exist. The position did not exist. Fogarty did not exist, at least not under that name or at the address he had given. And Coraline had arrived in Harrow with a trunk and $3, and no job and no acquaintance, and no way back to St. Louis, because $3 was not enough for a train ticket, and pride was not enough for begging. She had spent her $3 in 6 days, $1 for 2 nights at the boarding house, $1 for food, $1 for a telegram to her sister in St. Louis that was never answered because her sister had moved, and the telegram office in St. Louis did not forward telegrams to forwarding addresses. After the $3 were gone, she had worked for meals, washing dishes at the hotel that did exist, a smaller, meaner establishment than the one Fogarty had described, scrubbing floors at the general store, helping the laundress carry wet sheets to the line behind the Methodist church. The work was irregular and unpaid in any currency except food, and the food was not enough, and the sleeping was in barns and sheds and, finally, in the root cellar beneath the Purdy house, because the root cellar was private, and the privacy mattered, because a woman sleeping in a public place is a woman who has announced her vulnerability to everyone who sees her, and Coraline Dunn was not willing to make that announcement. She had been in the root cellar for 4 days when Jasper Holbrook found her. Jasper Holbrook was 41 years old, and he owned a farm 3 miles south of Harrow, 200 acres of bottomland along Cypress Creek, with a house that was too large for one person, a barn that was too large for the stock he kept, and a loneliness that was too large for anything. He had been married once, to a woman named Clara who had died of scarlet fever 7 years earlier, and the 7 years since Clara's death had been years of work and silence, and the gradual understanding that work and silence, while sufficient for survival, are not sufficient for life, and that the difference between survival and life is approximately the width of a kitchen table, with 1 chair at it instead of 2. He had come to the Purdy place to salvage lumber. The chimney stones were good, and the cellar timbers, despite the charring, were sound, and Jasper needed timbers for a new equipment shed he was building. He climbed down into the root cellar with a lantern and a pry bar on a Tuesday morning in October, and he found Coraline Dunn sitting against the far wall with a blanket around her shoulders and a book in her lap, and the particular composure of a person who has been found in a place she did not want to be found, and who is deciding, in the first 3 seconds of the finding, whether to run or to stay. The cellar smelled of cold earth and charcoal, and the faint sweetness of potatoes that had been stored there before the fire, and had rotted into the dirt. The air was still. The lantern threw their shadows against the stone walls, his large and solid, hers smaller and motionless against the far corner. She stayed. She stayed because running required energy, and she had not eaten since the previous afternoon, and the energy was not available, and because the man with the lantern was standing in the only exit, and because his face, lit from below by the lantern, was a face that showed surprise, but not threat, and the difference between surprise and threat was a difference that Coraline had learned to read accurately, because her survival depended on the reading. "I am not stealing," she said. "I am sleeping here. The cellar was empty. I am not damaging anything. Jasper looked at her. He looked at the blanket and the book and the small bundle beside her that contained, he would learn later, everything she owned. A second dress, a comb, a bar of soap, and a tin of crackers that was nearly empty. He looked at the root cellar around her, the stone walls, the dirt floor, the charred timbers above her head, and he understood immediately and completely what he was looking at. He was looking at a woman who was living underground because she had nowhere else to live. "How long have you been here?" he said. 4 days. 4 days in a root cellar. The cellar is dry. The walls block the wind. It is better than the alternatives. What are the alternatives? There are no alternatives. That is why I am in the root cellar. Jasper set the lantern on the ground. He sat down on the cellar step, which put him at eye level with Coraline across the small space, and the sitting down was deliberate. He could have remained standing, looking down at her, and the looking down would have established something about power and position, and instead, he sat, and the sitting established something about equality, which was not a word Jasper Holbrook would have used, but which was the principle his body chose. "My name is Jasper Holbrook," he said. "I have a farm on Cypress Creek. The house has 4 rooms, and 2 of them are empty, and have been empty for 7 years. I came here for timbers. I did not expect to find a person. But I have found a person, and the person is living in a hole in the ground, and I have empty rooms, and I cannot know both of those facts at the same time and do nothing about them. I am not looking for charity. I am not offering charity. I am offering a room. There is a difference. Charity is given to relieve the giver's conscience. A room is given because a room exists, and a person needs it, and the distance between the two facts is the distance between decency and indifference, and I prefer decency." Coraline looked at him for a long time. The looking was the assessment of a woman who had been deceived by Fogarty and disappointed by the telegram that was never answered, and let down by every system and structure that was supposed to prevent a woman from ending up in a root cellar. And the assessment was thorough, because thoroughness was the only protection she had left. "There will be a lock on the door," she said. It was not a question. "There is a lock on the door. It locks from the inside. I will show you the lock before you decide." She went with him. She went with him because the root cellar was getting colder every night as October deepened, and because the crackers were almost gone, and because the man who had sat down on the cellar step instead of standing over her had offered a room the way a person offers a fact, without conditions, without expectation, with the simple understanding that some things do not require negotiation because they are obvious. The farmhouse was white and needed paint, and had a porch that wrapped around 2 sides, and a kitchen that was large and warm, and a stove that was lit, and producing the particular warmth that a stove produces when it has been tended by a person who understands fire. Not the blazing heat of a stove that has been overfed, but the steady, even warmth of a stove that has been given exactly what it needs. The room was upstairs, at the end of the hall, with a window that looked out over the creek, and a bed with a quilt, and a washstand with a basin and a pitcher, and, as promised, a door with a lock that turned from the inside with a solid iron bolt. Coraline turned the lock. She turned it and heard it click, and the clicking was the sound of safety, and safety was a sound she had not heard in 3 weeks, and the not hearing had been so constant that she had forgotten what safety sounded like, and the remembering, triggered by the click of an iron bolt in a farmhouse on Cypress Creek, did something to her that she had not permitted herself to feel since arriving in Harrow. It let her be afraid. Not afraid of the cellar or the cold or the hunger, but afraid retroactively, afraid of what might have happened, afraid of the distance between the root cellar and the worst thing, which was a distance that she had not allowed herself to measure, because measuring it while she was still in it would have been paralyzing. And now, behind a locked door in a warm room, the measurement came, and the measurement was terrifying, and the terror was, paradoxically, a relief, because terror felt in safety is the mind's way of processing what it could not process in danger. The quilt on the bed was blue and white, a pattern Clara had stitched in the 2nd year of their marriage, and the stitching was fine and even and patient, the work of a woman who believed that beauty was not a luxury, but a necessity. And the quilt had been on the bed for 7 years, waiting for someone to sleep under it again. She cried. She sat on the bed, and she cried. And the crying was quiet and brief and necessary. And when she was finished, she washed her face in the basin, and she went downstairs. And Jasper was at the kitchen table, with coffee, and bread, and butter, and a plate of eggs. And the plate of eggs was for her, and the coffee was for both of them. And the bread was sliced and the butter was fresh, and the entire arrangement was domestic and ordinary and unremarkable, which was exactly what she needed, because the ordinary was the antidote to the extraordinary circumstances that had brought her to Harrow, and to the root cellar, and to this kitchen. She ate. She ate slowly and carefully, the way a person eats who has not eaten enough in too long, and Jasper sat across from her and drank his coffee, and did not watch her eat, because watching a hungry person eat is a kind of invasion, and Jasper Holbrook, whatever else he was a man who understood boundaries the way he understood fences. They existed for a reason. They should be respected, and the respecting was not a sacrifice but a practice. She stayed. She stayed because the room was warm, and the door locked, and the food was real, and the man who provided all three did not seem to require anything in return except the occasional company of a person at the other end of the kitchen table, and the company was something she could give, because giving company is not a cost. It is a mutual benefit, the way a fire warms both sides of a room. She began to work. She began the way she had begun in Harrow, by making herself useful, because usefulness was the currency she trusted, and because working for her keep transformed the arrangement from charity into exchange. And exchange was something she could accept without the weight of obligation. She cooked, she cleaned, she organized the pantry, which had been organized by a man who alphabetized his spices, but who kept the flour next to the axle grease. She washed the curtains that had not been washed in 7 years, and when the curtains came off the line, clean and sun-bleached and smelling of wind, the light in the kitchen changed, and the changing of the light was the first visible evidence that Coraline Dunn was not just occupying the house but altering it, the way a person alters any space they inhabit, not by moving walls but by bringing life. Jasper noticed the light. He noticed it the way he noticed the weather. It was simply different, and the difference was better, and the betterness was connected to the woman who had come from a root cellar, and who was now standing at his stove making soup that filled the house with a smell he had forgotten existed, the smell of a home that contains more than one person. Weeks passed. November came. The work of the farm continued. The harvest was in. The stock was bedded for winter. The fences were mended. The wood was split and stacked, and Coraline was part of the work now, not as a laborer, but as a partner, helping with the accounts that Jasper kept in a ledger that was meticulous but lonely, adding her entries beside his, her handwriting small and tidy next to his large and angular script. One evening in late November, Jasper sat at the kitchen table while Coraline read by the lamp, the same book she had been reading in the root cellar, a novel she had carried from St. Louis, because it was the one thing she would not leave behind, the one thing that was not practical but necessary. Jasper looked at her reading and he said, quietly, as though the quietness of the saying could diminish the weight of what was being said, "The room upstairs has been empty for 7 years. It is not empty anymore. I would like it to not be empty again." Coraline looked up from the book. She looked at Jasper across the kitchen table, across the ledger and the lamp and the clean curtains and the smell of soup, and she understood that what he was saying was not a proposal, but a statement of fact. The room was not empty. The house was not empty. The chair at the table was not empty. And the not emptiness was the thing they had built together without discussing it, the way a house is built one board at a time, until the boards become walls and the walls become rooms, and the rooms become a place where a person can stay. "I came here from a root cellar," she said. "I know where you came from. I had nothing. You had a book. You were reading in a root cellar in October. A person who reads in a root cellar is not a person who has nothing. A person who reads in a root cellar is a person who has decided that even in the worst place, the life of the mind matters, and I would like to share a house with that person for as long as that person will stay." Coraline closed the book. She set it on the table between them. The book that had traveled from St. Louis to Harrow, to a root cellar, to this kitchen. And the setting down was an answer. And the answer was yes. And the yes was not given, because she had nowhere else to go. She had somewhere to go now. She could work, she could earn, she could leave. The yes was given, because the house on Cypress Creek was not a root cellar, and Jasper Holbrook was not Fogarty. And the room upstairs with the lock on the door was a room she had chosen, and the choosing was the thing that made it home.